Taylor Swift is a multimedia storyteller. There is this thing that I call the Taylor Swift multimedia universe, and I think it is all of the things that she's loved in her life that have been important foundational things on who she is as a person. And I think all of this media is stuff that she wants as many of her fans as possible consume, because they are things that really helped her learn a lot of the lessons that she needed to learn in her life. I believe that every human is a collage of all of the people, places, and things that we have experienced in our lives. For example, I love making films because one of my first boyfriends did. I love sci-fi movies because my father does. I love Christmas because both of my grandmothers did. There are so many things that even if somebody's only in our life for a brief period of time, they can really make us find a hobby or an interest or a love that we never realized that we had until that person came into our life. And I think that sometimes those people that come into our lives that we think are there for something important aren't necessarily there to be there forever. They're just there to impart a single piece of wisdom that's going to change the trajectory of our lives and set us on the course that we needed to be on. Every single one of us is a quilt made up of fragments of the things that we have experienced and the people who've inspired us, sewn together with the love that we have for ourselves. And all of Taylor's work is kind of this enormous quilt of all of the things, the movies, the albums, the people that have influenced her and inspired her in various different ways in her life. And while Taylor may not call it a quilt herself, we can definitely see evidence of the same theme or a same mentality in her, where she takes all of these things that she's inspired by, all of these people that she's inspired by, and makes songs out of it. These songs may explicitly and directly reference somebody who inspired her, like Marjorie or The Last Great American Dynasty, or more subtle references like He Could Be My Jailer, Burton to This Taylor. But Taylor is also a millennial, and if there's one thing I know about people our generation, it's that many of us were very heavily influenced by media. I think the late Gen Xers into millennials had interesting childhoods because we were really the first generations that could listen to the same song or album a million times in a row, or watch the same film or TV show a million times in a row. And so that, coupled with the number of us who had two parents in the workforce, is why I think we're also one of the first generations that was really heavily raised by media. Because regardless of the situation, a lot of our parents were very busy, and a lot of our parents also didn't necessarily have the emotional availability to meet the emotional needs that a lot of us had. A lot of us were raised in that generation where, like, we should be grateful for the fact that we got food, clothing, and a roof over our heads. But a lot of situations, a lot of millennials, late Gen Xers, early Gen Zs, their parents weren't necessarily as emotionally available for them as they needed it to be, so they found a lot of solace in media. And especially as a socially isolated nerd, I know that I myself turned to media for a lot of emotional validation, a lot of, like, validation that there were other people like me in the world, because people wrote these characters, and I relate to these characters, so obviously there's got to be other people in the world that are like these people, and until I find them, I'm just going to mold myself around Deanna Troy. And Valana Torres. Like, we joke a lot about the millennials who make Harry Potter their entire personality trait, and there's a lot of layers, there's a lot of room for discussion there, but I think they're kind of an example of this trait being taken to an extreme, where they're wholly fixated on one piece of media to an insane degree. When a single piece of comfort media is very highly wrapped around somebody's sense of self and their identity, any attacks or criticisms of that piece of media can be perceived as an attack against that person's identity or sense of self. Fortunately, I don't believe Taylor loves any one piece of media to that extreme. Rather, she seems to be inspired and influenced and molded by a tremendous volume of media. To list a few of the more prominent ones: Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, Into the Woods, The Truman Show, numerous Robin Williams films including Hook, Dead Poets Society, What Dreams May Come, and Jumanji, and many, many, many more. And a list of hundreds, if not thousands, of musical artists. I believe there's a list of dozens, if not hundreds, of pieces of media that Taylor is directly or indirectly inspired by. I'm sure you've noticed it yourself. I'm only going to name a few here just because I don't want to overwhelm people, but please let me know the ones that you've noticed down in the comments below. But let's pivot for a moment. Hidden messages. Now let's pivot and talk about how Taylor has really tried to send us messages in as many different ways as she possibly can. And she's really good at it, so good at it that I don't think most people are fully aware of all of the ways that she does it. Yes, she is a pop star, yes, she's a performance artist, but more so than that, she is a storyteller, and one who uses all of the mediums and modalities available to her to tell different stories. Ever since her very first album, she was looking for new and interesting ways to communicate things to us that didn't involve just the lyrics and the music. Like, sure, the text and the subtext of her lyrics does have a lot of meaning, and the music adds to that. But that's just a start. Let's discuss some of the other ways that she tells us stories. So you have the imagery that's on screen during her tours, the lighting, the dance moves, the costumes, her Eras tour book, the plots of her music videos, the visual metaphors, the colors, the visual symbolism, the photo shoots for her albums, the merch for her albums, her PR pap wall, walks, what she's wearing and who she's with, her social media presence. Taylor was one of the first like chronically online celebrities. She was one of the first like real mainstream artists to embrace things like MySpace and Tumblr. And I think a lot of her newer and younger fans, especially people who became fans after the Reputation era was already over, do not realize how like she used to communicate with us in any number of ways on her social media, through her social media, and she has really minimized that to like a huge degree in recent years. I think a lot of people who are newer fans may not realize how much of a meme lord she was back in the day. For example, there was this meme that was going around Tumblr about this girl named Becky who allegedly died because of things that I can't discuss on this site. But she allegedly died, and the picture that was posted of Becky was Taylor Swift, and somebody had replied to that and said, no, that's Taylor Swift, and then somebody else replied and said, no, it's Becky. And then that had all been screenshot and went around the internet as like a single meme. And when this meme was like really hitting its peak of making the rounds, Taylor came out in a shirt that said, no, it's Becky. That is not a Photoshop. That is not like a fan thing. That is something that actually happened back in the day. And I miss those days. I miss those days when she was more obvious about the ways that she interacted with her fans. But those are just the most obvious examples, because there are a lot of like puzzles and Easter eggs and quizzes and things like that that are being used to tell a story as well. The letter code that she used to use on her liner notes, the puzzles she had on Google, pop-up displays that she had before TTPD that you could go to, and there were like books and typewriters and you could like actually like see them in person. I think it was a Spotify collaboration. And any number of events that are designed to like go to an area that is either literally someplace that's important to Taylor's life or like a museum that has things that are important to her life. One of the really groundbreaking things about Taylor is just the number of ways she communicates to her fans, the number of ways she storytells, the number of ways she sends messages. But also, as somebody who was very into postmodernist theory when I was in film school, I kind of have this attitude where like all of the basic plots and all of the basic stories have already been told. There's no like base plot that is new and exciting, and once you've reached that point as a cultural society and as an artistic medium, there is nothing left to do but to like disassemble things and mix and match them together in different and new and interesting ways, looking at different perspectives. Kind of like what Disney did with the Cruella remake. Instead of just retelling the 101 Dalmatians story again for the 45th time, they're like, hey, let's look at maybe what motivated Cruella. And no, there was nothing groundbreaking about the narrative plot trajectory of Cruella. What made Cruella interesting is that we were looking at a character in a more sympathetic light. It was a different perspective, it was a different time period, and it was also a prequel. It was the events leading up to the events that we already knew about. And it feels to me, as somebody who has spent a lot of time analyzing Taylor's work recently, that she very much likes grabbing little bits and pieces of different things and mashing them together and contextualizing and recontextualizing them. A great example is But Daddy, I Love Him. But Daddy, I Love Him is a recontextualization of the plot of The Little Mermaid. It's kind of like a, hey, what if Ariel didn't have to get Ursula involved and King Triton just kind of came around on his own and approved of the relationship? That's kind of how I see it in my mind. But also, most importantly, Taylor loves sending additional messages to her most hardcore fans. Taylor in her albums is like her most censored, right? Because the highest number of people are going to experience those. And I think her singles are going to be the songs that the greatest number of people are going to experience, especially people like the media, especially people that are going to write, you know, slam pieces against her, people that are willing to say anything about Taylor to get clicks on their internet site and to get a little bit of extra coin in their pocket. Taylor is very aware that she can't communicate like the deepest, darkest truths of her life in so direct of a form as her songs, as her singles. That said, we know from the Champagne Problem speech that Taylor very much needs to feel like other people relate to her. She needs the emotional validation that she gets from her fans. That's a huge element of the public performance for her, is getting that emotional validation from fans. So there are always going to be things that she wants to communicate to people who are most sympathetic without communicating in them so directly that Daily Mail can make an article off of it and make a fortune mocking her over something that, you know, she might be very sensitive about, something that might still be a wound that's unhealed for her. Taylor is always caught in this quandary where she wants to communicate her truth because she wants her truth to be understood by the people who are sympathetic to her truth, but there are a lot of people who are just trying to make money off of hurting her, and if those people have access to too much direct evidence of her truth, they can make a lot of profit off of hurting her and the people that she loves the most. Now let's discuss TTPD in the context of other media. And I want to make it clear, I don't think that TTPD is where she started doing this. There's obvious signs to her doing it, especially in Midnights, especially in the more recent albums, Folklore, Evermore. But I think especially with TTPD, it's kind of like where Taylor has really mastered it. Like, for example, Taylor has made a ton of references to the film Dead Poets Society, and if you've been here for a while, you already know where I'm going with this, because this is kind of one of the horses that I like to beat into. I believe that TTPD is intended as a soundtrack of sorts for Dead Poets Society, but I also feel that Dead Poets Society is a lens through which Taylor wants you to view TTPD and also her earlier work as well. So I don't know if I explained very well what I mean about seeing one piece of media through the lens of another piece of media. So imagine you have a rose-colored lens, right? That lens will make everything that you view appear rose. The things that you're viewing aren't actually rose, it's just the lens making you think that they appear rose. And when I say take a piece of media and examine it through the lens of another piece of media, what I mean is take the themes and the elements and the visuals, etc. of one piece of work and use that as a lens to amplify those themes or to add those themes to the other piece of work. Or treat them as a Venn diagram where you notice the traits of both pieces of media but focus primarily on the areas of overlap that both share. And if you still don't understand, I think it'll make a little bit more sense when we get later in the video and I'm giving you more examples. And it's not the only lens like that that I believe exists. Some of the other ones that I've identified are Weekend at Bernie's, The Truman Show, Wizard of Oz / Wicked, number of films from Robin Williams' career, but especially Dead Poets Society, What Dreams May Come, and Jumanji. These are all films that I believe TTPD references, but I also believe are analytical lenses through which to perceive TTPD. And I had thought that this was just a thought exercise that existed inside my own head until I actually went through Jack Antonoff's videos that were released in the lead up to TTPD. And in specific, there was a video posted a fortnight before TTPD that I think references this, or that I believe is to plant the seed of how to analyze TTPD. So I'm not going to play the whole thing here because he rambles on a little bit, but I'll have it linked down below. But Jack is in a recording studio and he's on FaceTime with his wife, Margaret. And whilst Taylor isn't visible in the video, there is a laugh that does sound very much like hers, and I very much suspect she's in the room while this is transpiring. And Jack is describing this concept for a prequel to Weekend at Bernie's. But the prequel isn't just that, it's Weekend at Bernie's through the context of Flowers for Algernon, and I'll explain that in just a couple of minutes.
So it's Flowers for Algernon set through the lens of Weekend at Bernie's. Margaret, you want to leave me?
That's a great idea.
What do you say?
It's a great idea.
But I believe this video was posted to plant a seed of like how we are supposed to analyze TTPD or what they're trying to do with TTPD or something along those lines. Getting us used to the concept of analyzing two pieces of media together in some fashion, or to view one piece of media through the lens of another piece of media. So let's start with Weekend at Bernie's in the context of Flowers for Algernon. And don't worry, I'm going to do brief introductions to each in case you're not familiar with them. So if you've never seen Weekend at Bernie's, all you need to know is that the main character, Bernie Lomax, is dead the entire time, but two of his employees go through elaborate hijinks to make it seem like he's alive, and everyone falls for it because in truth, most people are so wrapped up in their own heads that they don't notice if somebody's parading around an actual animated corpse in front of them. Flowers for Algernon is about a mouse named Algernon who goes through a medical procedure to become more intelligent. The narrator of Algernon's tale is a human named Charlie who has gone through the same procedure. And one of the most gripping things about Flowers for Algernon is that Charlie writes these progress reports to discuss Algernon. Because Charlie is going through the same process, the progress reports start off very simple with poor grammar, and they get better and better written as the plot continues. In the end, Algernon ends up having a sharp backslide and regresses before dying, and we see Charlie struggling to process what he knows about his own mortality, and his writing quality deteriorates as he begins to backslide as well. Jack's TikTok, I believe, is designed to help as a clue or a code stone, of course. It feels like an Easter egg that is designed to get the ball rolling, start scooching people in the right direction of analyzing Taylor's work. So Jack describes a prequel for Weekend at Bernie's, wherein a real person named Bernie Lomax gradually realized that he is the Bernie Lomax from Weekend at Bernie's, that his friends are the aforementioned two employees from the film, and that he is going to die at the end of the film the way Bernie dies before the events of Weekend at Bernie's. And Jack sums this up as Flowers for Algernon set through the lens of Weekend at Bernie's. And I think part of the additional context that we're supposed to take from Flowers for Algernon is like, Sometimes it's worse when you know that something bad is going to happen and like you're watching it happen in real time. You're watching something terrible happen to you in your life in real time. It is hard, especially for Americans with the way our society and our values are structured, to confront our own mortality, our own decline. And there are a couple of really interesting ways that this whole scenario can be linked back to Taylor and her work and what she's trying to do. Because Taylor dying, or a version of her dying, is so imperative to her work and what she's done, I can't help but wonder if this Weekend at Bernie's / Flowers for Algernon scenario is actually about Taylor and versions of herself. But also, it relates in how Taylor has seen other pop stars like her get chewed up and spit out, how other it girls like her get bruised and broken by the industry, see Clara Bow. And there is somewhat of a belief in showbiz that a female pop star becomes less valuable once she reaches 35 years of age. Even the big greats like Madonna and Mariah Carey and such tend to make less money after 35. And more broadly, I believe Taylor has had this number, 35, in the back of her head for a while as kind of like the things I want to achieve explicitly as a pop star have to be achieved by then. And I also think increasingly we're going to see her pivot to genres and mediums where older women's work is more financially rewarded. I think that, plus her clear love for film, is why we're going to see her eventually push in the filmmaking direction. I also wonder if one of the things we're supposed to get from the Flowers for Algernon reference is the concept that a form of a narrative can mirror the function of a narrative. For example, perhaps songs on TTPD that seem like they are written by a younger version of Taylor are written that way because they are emotionally meant to represent her at a previous state. Maybe it's to demonstrate that there are some elements of her and her psyche that are still in arrested development. Taylor has mentioned a couple of times before about how people can get frozen in ways at the emotional maturity they're at when a traumatic event happens in their life, and she said that this is something that she feels has happened to her. Now, I made a TikTok a couple weeks ago where I analyzed Bernie and Algernon together. Then I also used Jack's metaphor or framing device to incorporate other pieces of media that Taylor has been referencing a lot with her work. I think it's also interesting to incorporate Truman Show through the lens of The Wizard of Oz and how both of those relate to Taylor and her art and her journey. In The Truman Show, an elaborate lie was developed so that tons of people could profit considerably off of Truman, and there were a number of mechanisms that tried to stop Truman from leaving his controlled world and from knowing the truth of his existence, but he still manages to get out in the end. And then you have The Wizard of Oz, where you have hypothetically always had the power within you all along. You just had to learn more about yourself and develop yourself and make friendships and help people along the way in order to actualize that power and take yourself home. Especially when we have Taylor's existence being posited as a gilded cage, when we've been discussing this battle between Taylor Swift the person and Taylor Swift the brand, when we've also been discussing the symbolic and literal journey that the Eras Tour is, and how many aspects of The Wizard of Oz are truly present in the Eras Tour imagery and things like that. There are a number of things that link Taylor's work, especially her recent work, to The Wizard of Oz. I think The Truman Show especially is key because of how valuable Truman had become to the corporations who owned him, and the way Taylor is similar and controlled and caged by her own image and her own brand. I also think it's interesting that one of the things that makes Truman realize his life is fake is that his relationship with his wife lacks depth, and very often extremely wealthy people's relationships lack emotional depth. And especially if what many of us believe about PR relationships or bearding relationships or lavender relationships are true, Taylor may especially relate to this concept that the heteronormative relationships she took part in lacked realness. Seeing the Eras Tour in part as her following the yellow brick road and going on the journey with her friends that was necessary to be able to own her life's work and then have the power to do what she's wanted to do all along and end The Truman Show, it is a powerful metaphor when you combine the two together, and one I genuinely hope comes to fruition. And of course, because you know I always have to come back to my favorite dog in the race, let's discuss TTPD in the context of Dead Poets Society. If you've never seen Dead Poets Society before, it's about an all-boys boarding school where a handful of boys are using secret poetry meetings as an escape from the rigidly regimented world of their boarding school. I think to simplify it, one of the biggest themes is just sacrificing emotion and love and passion for conformity so that you can have greater academic and eventually financial success. It is also very explicitly about having a challenging relationship with your father and the weight the expectations your parents as a whole have can place on you. And finally, one of the most interesting things about Dead Poets Society is how the queer subtext of boys alone at the boarding school is something that has been very embraced, and not just by the fandom of the film, but also by a lot of the cast and crew behind the creation of the film. A lot of times when queer people analyze a piece of mainstream media from a queer perspective, it is rare to have the creators of that art actually accept and encourage that reading. And I think especially with everything that I know about Hollywood and just people needing to conceal their queerness to succeed as a whole, there are such explicit homoerotic vibes vibes in the film that it's hard to ignore. One of the big themes of TTPD, in my opinion, is that the sacrifices one makes when prioritizing financial stability and elevating the family name over pursuing the person you generally want to be and the lover that you actually want to be with, it's not worth it. I've said a number of times that especially in the anthology, there are a lot of themes of being at odds with one's parents, especially one's father, and I have honestly been on the Scott Swift Hater Club for years now. And that's a stance that I've only increased since the Scott Swift emails released and gave us a vibe about what he actually thought about his ex-wife and his children. And I do think one of the cages that has trapped Taylor is the damage that she has from the way she was parented, and making music is part of the way she heals herself and others from that damage. But also, it's just so hard to be open and say, yeah, dad and mom ruined my life, when dad and mom still work at the company business. Taylor Swift is more than just the person Taylor Swift. The brand is a family business, and in fact, arguably the most successful family business in this country. That makes it very difficult for her to say things against her family. And obviously, I'm someone who can't ignore the elements of queer subtext in Taylor's art, and the fact that she is so heavily pushing her art and TTPD alongside Dead Poets Society, a film whose modern fandom is largely comprised of people who believe in the homoerotic subtext, I believe this is just another of the myriad ways she is trying to get her most observant fans to realize that she's not straight, and to get us comfortable with that so that when she does feel ready to explain her truth, people don't feel like it's coming out of nowhere. Linking Tortured Poets Department to Dead Poets Society gives us so much added layers of meaning, especially because I believe she relates to each of the main boys in the group in different ways. Even the boy that constantly snitches on them is someone that, at least Taylor Swift the Snake persona kind of relates to. But there are other reasons for her to be interested in doing stuff like this as well. Like, fans curate extensive lists of every film, every song, every book that she's ever mentioned, and we go over these lists and we listen to all the songs and we read all the books and we read all of the poems and things like that. And in doing that, in consuming media that I am only aware exists because of Taylor, I have learned so much stuff about myself. I've learned so much stuff about feminism. I've learned so much stuff about queer rights. Like, so many of the things that she has referenced in her corpus have taken me to a place where I learn new things about myself, and I'm able to go forth a better person in this world. And one of my big themes is always just, you can't really motivate change by lecturing people. People don't want to be lectured. But if you give people the puzzle pieces to solve their own problems, they will put the puzzle together. If you give young women who are considering going into relationships with older men the puzzle pieces that are coulda, shoulda, woulda, woulda, sorry, I always forget what the exact name of that song is. You know the one. Dear John, and All Too Well 10-minute version. If you give them those pieces, there's a very high chance, a higher chance than if you just lectured those girls, that they are not going to go into those relationships because they get finally like, wait, these guys are pathetic. Why do these guys want to date 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds? They're in their mid-20s. I read the book Untamed because it's something that Taylor referenced once in a tweet indirectly, and it is probably the single most important thing that I have ever read in my life. I was so impacted by it that I had to go out and get the journal and actually do the journal. And one of these days I really do want to make a video about that book and what I've learned from that book and everything like that. But it is so clear after reading that book how much that impacted Taylor and how she sees the world. I do think part of the new romantics movement that Taylor has going on is giving people the puzzle pieces to solve the problems that they were given, especially women, the puzzle pieces to solve their problems with relationships with men, with things in the workplace, all of that jazz. She is giving so many people the tools to solve their own problems. And also, just another reason that Taylor would want to do this is because she loves puzzles. We love puzzles. Like, it's just a thing that we have always shared with her. And I think that this, incorporating media into her work, especially into TTPD so heavily, is just another sign of that. It's another way of communicating that. But Taylor Swift is also a meme lord. If you've been a fan of Taylor for a while, especially if you were on Tumblr or MySpace when she was really heavily active there, you probably remember her as something of a meme lord. Like I said, Now It's Becky will be one of the funniest things she has ever done. And we very often joke that she sees all of the little jokes and memes the fandom have, and that's absolutely because she's internet culture trash just like the rest of us. But unfortunately, especially since Reputation era, she really hasn't had the same freedom to be the meme lord that she used to be, because she hasn't been able to afford to alienate her audience if she ever wants to own all of her life's work. But a meme lord can't be stopped, and so I believe Taylor has instead shifted to the second definition of meme. Meme, an element of a culture or system of behavior passed from one individual to another by imitation or other non-genetic means. I think Taylor very often references bands and songs and films in her lyrics and in her music. I think some Swifties have noticed some of these references, but I think it's an avenue of research that we haven't done into enough. For example, in So High School, some people believe Brand New, Full Throttle is a reference to the band Brand New and the film Full Throttle. I personally believe when Taylor says Crestfallen on the Landing that she's referring to the Smashing Pumpkins song Crestfallen. And I've made a short video about Clara Bow and the various Jimmy Eat World songs that it sort of sounds like. And in addition to the other reasons that I've given for why she includes media in her work, I think one of the reasons that she's taking bits and pieces of different songs and incorporating them into Clara Bow is because that is probably music that she was listening to when she was in that Clara Bow, like, young coming up age, when she was really starting to blossom as a pop song, when she was really starting to blossom as a pop singer. Mid to late aughties Taylor Swift was absolutely emo trash, and there's so many emo music references in her music, but I think Clara Bow is one of the most, like, really obvious ones. I know some people are going to argue about Jimmy Eat World not being emo. They used to be. They were at one point in time. Not anymore. And I don't think they necessarily intended to be, but a lot of their music is emo. I think as someone who is clearly very obviously obsessed with media, that, like, the songs that were playing and the films that she was watching and the shows that she was watching when these moments in her life were happening were a critical part of that time period. And I wonder if she's kind of like me. When she plays playlists from a long time ago, she's kind of instantly transported back to those moments. Those sights, those sounds, those images, all of those things that she's incorporating into various songs are indelible marks on that moment in Taylor's soul, if that makes sense. And so she wants to incorporate those things into those songs, into the art that she's creating in various ways. And I focus mostly on Clara Bow and Jimmy Eat World. I know that there are other creators who have found other, like, auditory references to other music in TTPD tracks. But one of the points that I want people to take from this is to, like, listen to her music hard, read her lyrics, like, look at the imagery, think of the things that it reminds you of, because there's a good chance that she is deliberately making things that are, like, designed to make us feel nostalgic. Absolutely, Clara Bow makes me feel nostalgic too, because I was very obsessed with Jimmy Eat World when I was coming into age as an adult. Like, I think that's one of the reasons that song gripped me so much, is because I am close enough in age to Taylor that I was going through stuff at the same period. And I have that music as, like, a really heavily influenced part of that era in my life. I also think, like I said, just viewing media through the lens of other media, like seeing the similarities between a film and Taylor's album or a TV show and Taylor's album, and really considering the other themes from the shows and the movies and how they might apply to Taylor's work and her art and the story that she's trying to tell us. Taylor Swift is a multimedia storyteller. There is this thing that I call the Taylor Swift multimedia universe, and I think it is just, like, all of the things that she's loved in her life that have been important foundational things on who she is as a person. And I think all of this media is stuff that she wants as many of her fans as possible to consume, because they are things that really helped her learn a lot of the lessons that she needed to learn in her life. Taylor Swift learns through other people's stories and teaches through her own story. And a lot of times she's regurgitating the lessons that she's learned from others back out at us with references to her own stories in hopes that we will learn the lessons easier than she and her predecessors had to. The wisest women. I'm definitely going to dig into this concept more. And let me know down in the comments, what are the films, what are the TV shows, what are the songs, what things have you been reminded of by especially TTPD, but a lot of Taylor's recent work. At least everything since Lover era, when she's been very much in control of it creatively. If you like this video, I am still a small content creator. Your likes, comments, subscriptions, and shares really do help me out a lot. Thank you so very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.